Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Ben, for the opportunity to come before you again. I'm going to sort of speed through the various topics on the agenda, and perhaps we can backfill through questions and answers. Let me first talk about Venezuela. As many of you know, I've been here before to talk about it. The low-intensity conflict continues to simmer in Venezuela between mostly young protesters and the government of Nicolas Maduro. The government has been unable to quell or quash the disturbances, and that has led to debate here in Washington about whether the United States could use some of its sanctioning powers to target human rights violators. We're not talking about sanctioning the government or otherwise harming U.S. commerce or oil sanctions or anything like that. We are talking, the legislation before the Senate and the House is targeting Venezuelan officials, meaning the security forces who engage in egregious human rights violations against protesters in the street. It is the same approach that we have undertaken in Russia, where people are their assets and their U.S. visas are being targeted. Now, some may think, well, you know, a U.S. visa, what import could that have? The fact is to a Latin American, a U.S. visa is very important. This is where they shop. This is where they send their kids to be educated. It is very painful for a Latin American to have his or her visa pulled. Let me just back up 1 second before I talk about the sanctions. And that is interesting development over the last couple of weeks in Venezuela, is that there has been a schism, a dissension within Chavismo's own ranks, the government's own ranks. And that resulted from the President Maduro firing a long-standing planning minister who had been very loyal to Hugo Chavez before his death. And he was summarily fired. And he went out with a blast of both barrels in a public letter accusing the government. This man is a Chavista through and through, old-line socialist. He went out blasting against the government three very, very sensitive issues: denouncing massive corruption within the government, denouncing its economic incompetence, and thirdly, denouncing its weak leadership. These are three elements that are basically the shortcomings of this government. And now, if a Democratic opposition, somebody out in the street says it, that's one thing. But now it's coming from Chavismo's own ranks. Several other ministers, former ministers that had served under Hugo Chavez, aligned themselves with the fired minister. So now Nicolas Maduro is not only dealing with the students in the street, the very, very active Democratic opposition calling the government to account. It is now dealing with grumblings within its own ranks. Now, the situation will not change. The key variable, of course, continues to be the Venezuelan military. It has shown no indication yet of a desire to move in a new direction, forcing Maduro out or otherwise staging, frankly, a coup. So that remains the key variable, but it is not getting better for Nicolas Maduro. And the fact is that now we have talked, before this group, we had talked before about the types of shortages that have afflicted a country with massive amounts of oil. You have electricity shortages, and now latest is water shortages. I mean, you cannot make this stuff up. 60% inflation. The things continue to get worse. Why do we care? We've said this before. There's various reasons why we need to care about Venezuela. And Venezuela is right here, at the top of South America. We need to care about democracy in our own neighborhood. We need to care about the fact that Venezuela is a major transit zone, has developed into a major transit zone for narcotics coming north through Central America, which we'll talk about in a minute. And thirdly, oil. Oil production, major oil producer. Its production influences world prices. We also know that Venezuela has expressed solidarity, has developed alliances with the bad guys. Iran, Hezbollah also have taken advantage of a permissive environment in Venezuela to operate. Sanctions, as I said, sanctions. The administration does not want to impose sanctions. They have their own ideological reasons, but ironically enough, we have bipartisan support for the type of sanctions that I mentioned, and that is targeting individual violators of human rights in Venezuela. But as I said, ironically enough, we are running into some opposition from the Republican side of the aisle, and that is explicitly Senator Bob Corker, the ranking minority on Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The chairman, Bob Menendez from New Jersey, supports sanctions. Most of the Republicans on the panel also, there would be no question, it's already passed the House, there would be no question that it would pass the full Senate. But apparently my assumption is out of courtesy, the Senate, Harry Reid this week came out in support of sanctions against individual Venezuelans. But Senator Corker, and again, I've got good friends that work for Senator Corker, former colleagues and friends, but for some reason, my assumption up until, I was talking to Ben about this, my assumption up until about 2 days ago was that Senator Corker basically had a philosophical aversion to sanctions in general. But just this week, reading the paper, I see that he was criticizing the Obama administration for its feckless, the word he used, feckless use of sanctions in Russia. So that sort of knocked me for a loop. Why are they effective in Russia, but they wouldn't be effective in Venezuela? So I expect to have some conversations with his staff about that because it turned around my assumption pretty quickly that this was some sort of academic point not favoring the sanctions, but given his advocacy for sanctions in Russia, it's going to cause me to have to go back to his staff and see what the explanation can be. So at this point, I don't know where we're going to go on sanctions against. I believe that they're warranted. I believe that the reason why you do not see a resolution in Venezuela to the conflict between the people in the street and the government, the reason why you don't see a resolution there today is because there has been no cost to the Maduro government for unleashing its security forces against the protesters. But if you start driving up a cost and you start picking off Chavistas and people aligned with the government and making them individuals pay a price, I think you're going to exacerbate the conflicts already evident within the ruling coalition, within Chavismo. So I think that it is the time is right even more now that the government is finding itself in such a predicament. It's easy when it can defend itself against the squalid oligarchs and the hooligans in the street, but it's finding itself in a very difficult position defending itself among people who associate themselves with Chavez's real vision. So let me, and we can talk about Venezuela if you'd like. Let me go back to Central America. And Dakota, you had a skull and crossbones over what we call the northern tier countries. That is right here. These are the source. Those countries, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, are the three countries that are generating the current surge of unaccompanied minors, women, and thousands that are besieging our border right now. This is a crisis foretold long ago. It is the product, it is the end product. Yes, it was ignited by the administration's unilateral actions on immigration reform, and yes, a 2008 law that was passed to combat sex trafficking, and it is a result of really ignoring a developing crisis. Central America is suffering right now a threat, and I know there's enough grizzled veterans around the table to remember the 1980s and the crisis that was stoked by Soviet and Cuban subversion in Central America. Of course, we know that there was a full court press by the Reagan administration to stem that assault, and we are back to a situation where Central America is facing an incredibly destabilizing offensive onslaught. And what I'm talking about is not guerrilla armies, but international crime, international criminal organizations. They have established networks that all the way down, Dakota had a skull and crossbones over what's called the tri-border area, southern Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay. But these are drug trafficking networks, they're human trafficking networks, and weapons trafficking, and it begins down here and goes all the way up here, right to our border. Why Central America at this point?
Yeah.
Perfect. Because what you have in Central America is we have Colombia here, Mexico here. Both those countries in recent years have undertaken significant counter-offensives against the drug traffickers. And what that has done, and U.S. policy has shut off maritime routes running up from along the Pacific coast and through the Caribbean. So what you have today is drug trafficking networks that are shifting their operations into the landmass. This has been cut off, this has been cut off, pressure here, pressure there. Central America caught right in the middle. Now these drug trafficking networks and CTOs are in alliance with the gangs, local gangs, and it has made life particularly insecure for Central Americans. And basically, these countries, these small countries, simply do not have the manpower, they do not have the weaponry, they do not have the institutions. And basically, manpower, weapons, and resources is everything the criminal organizations have. They're buying local governments, they're buying national governments, they're suborning public officials, they are buying police officers, military officers all along the isthmus of Central America. The gangs are running rampant, and basically it is fueling a desperation among people to simply get out. And what I say is that the administration, the current administration, needs to approach this with the same commitment, with the same high-profile ownership that the Reagan administration approached the problem in the 1980s. And that is to go in there and not only help these governments to build effective institutions, to train and vet law enforcement capabilities, but to rally government political will, local political will, to take on these tough choices. That is how we need to approach this problem.
Jose, thank you very much. Do you want to say anything at all specifically about the border situation that we find ourselves in at the moment? I mean, you've sort of set the predicate by talking about the context, but we're witnessing, well, I called it earlier, an invasion of the country, and it seems at the moment no end to the magnet that is going to be pulling more of these people forward. Do you see it playing out that way for the foreseeable future, unless and until Congress presumably steps into the breach and tries to do something about it? And specifically, I guess, would you recommend that they put something like $4.0 billion into the president's hands for managing the crisis the way he is?
Unfortunately, Frank, most of that money is it's basically stopgap. It is dealing with the crisis of the moment. It does nothing to address the underlying causes. Now, it needs, frankly, to understand a little bit better how its own actions and how its own rhetoric play in these desperate societies, and it has operated as a pull effect. The smugglers are taking advantage of the 2008 sex trafficking law. That needs to be changed. The administration said it wanted to change it, and then it hasn't asked Congress to do so. So that has to be changed. And I do believe that in this present moment, we have to remain firm, and because rhetoric will only get you so far in terms of convincing people not to come. If they start seeing plane loads coming back, then that will quell, that will take the edge off the pull factor. I do think that we are in a moment where we do have to act very strictly. I'm a strong proponent of immigration reform, but I do believe that there are some red lines that are necessitated, or else we lose total control.
Thank you. Questions? Let me get somebody who didn't get a question. I'll come back to you. Go ahead.
The violent areas you're talking about have some of the highest murder rates. Do you think we should increase the amount of asylum visas for people fleeing the gangs?
Again, I believe that is a treating a symptom, where we need to be in a situation where people no longer are in a desperate situation that they need to flee. I think that we as a country have the power and have the wherewithal, if we have the political will, to help these countries establish more peaceful environments. And I think that if we ever want to get our arms around this immigration push north, then we have to make an effort to address the problem downrange.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Frank, this goes back to an earlier, before you started the meeting. I was at the confirmation hearings yesterday on Capitol Hill for the new commander of command in Afghanistan, General Campbell, but also with General...
Speak into the mic.
Also with General Votel, SOCOM, but they were also having a hearing on Admiral Gortney, who's going to be the NORTHCOM commander. And one of the questions was asked was exactly this: what's happening? What are you going to do? Whose responsibility? And his sort of tap dance number was, we're only in support of the lead federal agency. It's a Department of Homeland Security issue, period. And you looked at all the members of the Senate Armed Services Committee were there, and like you said, Frank, if this is a threat to our national security, I just personally sort of felt there was a cop-out on the part the members of the panel, both parties. Senator Cruz had a couple of comments, but Nobody's saying, exactly what are you going to do when you get there? How are you going to solve this? I don't want to hear the answer that, it's the Department of Homeland Security. Are you going to get additional National Guard personnel? What's going to happen?
Somebody who has also spoken very candidly about that is the commander of Southcom, General Kelly. When he was giving his posture statement earlier this year up on the Hill, he was speaking very candidly about the lack of resources at his disposal to deal with the drug trafficking and security threats downrange.
I think he's actually made a comment more recently than that, in which he talks
Yes.
really about sort of an apocalyptic
Yes.
problem, existential threat to the country, the United States.
He's desperate for more funding.
Fred?
Jose, jumping back to Venezuela, I forget how many billions the Chinese lent the Chavez government. Was it 20 or 40 billion?
Approximately,
And-
yes.
And essentially, they bought Chavez's reelection.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, concerning sanctions, how long do you think the Chinese are going to continue to prop up this government, or are they in so deep that they're not going to stop throwing money at Venezuela?
Yes, the latest indications, Fred, that we've been seeing is that there is a certain reluctance from the Chinese about getting in too much deeper on the financial end. They have lent Chavez billions, as you noted, and have filled increasingly his empty coffers for spending money to placate their constituencies. I think that they've lent that based on future oil exports. And I think the Chinese are starting to think, okay, what happens if Maduro falls and a new government repudiates those deals? So the Chinese, from a purely financial aspect, are showing a little bit more circumspection, but they want to be there, and they want to be in a position to extract oil from new fields, but they are very, very circumspect about the political uncertainty.
Mario?
Jose, in the best of circumstances, life in Latin America is awful, and people are used to it. So my question is, isn't this completely artificial, this present crisis? Because, I mean, why suddenly have people decided to leave in droves like that? I have the impression that it's totally artificial.
Well, there is an aspect of the smuggling networks that are pumping up this flow. What's happened is that as economic conditions in Mexico have leveled off, have improved, is that the smuggling networks are in need of new customers, and so they are parlaying the administration's moves on immigration, and they understood better than we do that 2008 law on how to game the U.S. system to get in. And so the human smugglers they want to stay in business, and they are putting out the word throughout these communities that that now is the time to come. And I think what you have on that end is, yes, drug traffickers have been around forever, but I think the new element is more widespread gang activity in these communities that are targeting, they reach out and touch individual Central Americans just trying to earn a living because they extort small businesses, they forcibly recruit youngsters into their gangs. So I think it's based on those two variables.
Could I ask a question about that? I know Aaron's going to have to get the last word in here, but the conduct of Mexico in all of this is appalling. We've had the president of Mexico personally participating this week, I think, or last in an agreement with Guatemala to facilitate the smuggling of illegal aliens into this country, that would seem to me to be a hostile act of a neighbor, or for that matter, of any country. There is talk, as you know, Jose, here in Congress about cutting off funding for these various countries if they don't stop this kind of behavior. The witting, complicit involvement in the violation of our immigration laws, made possible, as I say, by an agreement by the Mexicans to allow their own immigration laws, which are more stringent than ours, to be waived for the purposes of transiting these illegals. Could you comment on what this implies in terms of the U.S.-Mexican relationship, and whether you think it is advisable for leverage of this kind to be applied by the Congress?
I think that the administration needs to be more forceful. That's easy to say, but because we all know that this administration will be anything but forceful. I must say that they have begun to pressure these governments. I think I do not know what's going on behind closed doors. There have been several high-level meetings with the governments in question. I think that there is no room for anything other than deadly serious warnings and leverage from the United States to get these countries to be more responsible. And that's putting it diplomatically. I think that the behavior of the Mexicans is in letting these people simply traverse their territory because they're coming here is abhorrent. I think it is a terrible abuse of human rights and the dangers that these kids and these people are they're preyed upon. They're preyed upon by sexual predators, by thieves. It is atrocious. And I think that part of the reason why these governments, and this, I don't want to get into a longer explanation, Frank, but a part of the behavior of these governments is attributable to the fact that how unaccountable they are to their own citizens, because of ossified political structures that don't that really diminish people's ability to influence their own government. And they have these barriers and lack of accountability amongst their own people to answer for these for this type of behavior.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Last question, Aaron.
Yes, thank you very much. Following on our previous presentation regarding the Caribbean, our military assets and our Coast Guard assets, we did successfully clean up on the Pacific area and in the Caribbean, but we've lost territory there now as a consequence of the sequestration, listening to a hearing with Southcom. So because of our lack of presence and assets in those two sea lanes and the Caribbean, the cartels, i.e., more appropriately should be called, the cartels are now evolved into truly transnational criminal organizations, and they're taking back those waters, okay? Which is going to really aggravate things a lot, because the best way to get to the drugs is while they're still on ship, because once they land their cargo, it's dispersed like roaches. Open up a bag of roaches and it's gone. And so the one place you want to get this illicit cargo, whether it's drug, human trafficking, weapons, pick your product, it's at sea. And that is where I think was one of our weakest links. The other concern I have is Mexico is not just turning a blind eye. I think she's collaborating. Because I've traveled into Mexico and I have monitored those smuggling rats. I've sat there and watched. Every single road in Mexico has federales there, there's a checkpoint, and at each and every checkpoint, I don't care whether it's a truck full of vegetables, a bus, a shuttle bus, or just a car with 4 people in it, everybody gets off that vehicle and everything is offloaded. So the federales, the government knows who's going north, who's going south, east, west, whatever. And we know about the corruption within the Mexican government infrastructure. And it's now questionable in my mind whether Mexico is what you call a quasi-narco state, whatever, because the cartels, i.e. transnational criminal organization, has so much power and influence within the government. But also now we're talking about the northern tri-border region. I'm understanding now in the past 6 months there has now been cut a deal between those governments and the transnational criminal organizations, and the gangs are no longer separate. They are the arms, legs, the distributors, the enforcers. They're the army for the transnationals in this area. So it's hand in glove, and now those governments in the northern tri-border region, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, have had to cut a deal with the TCOs just to end the bloodletting in their own country. Now, what's interesting is Nicaragua.
We need to get to the question, if there is one.
Yeah, okay. People should be looking at Nicaragua because Ortega is part of the same thing, but he's got control of Nicaragua. And there were some comments like, why don't some of these guys go into Nicaragua? It's corrupt, got a lot of dough, but they have law enforcement. So they're handling it differently. My speculation is the cartels or the transnational criminal organizations are trying to use the smuggling route that's going on now, this crisis, to get as many of their people and their army, because the MS-13 is coming through, more well embedded into our country. So I just appreciate your comments on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any comments?
Well, I do not disagree. I think that that this crisis today, as I alluded to earlier, that I think that most of what we're seeing today is something that has been developing for many years, and that it has mestetized because of our inattention. And I think that now is the time, with this crisis on our own border and this humanitarian crisis, is to go to some of these countries, take the damn kick me sign off of our back, and saying that, okay, now it's time to get serious. So that's, you know, as they say, in all crisis, there's an opportunity. Well, this is an opportunity to get these countries' attention and make some demands and set down some expectations so that we can, once and for all, put an end to this human calamity that's been going on.
Yeah. From your lips to God's ears, Jose, thank you very much.